I wasn't always like this, jumpy, mistrustful, constantly looking over my shoulder. Back then, I was just another overworked office drone with a passion for hiking and a longing for escape. My name's Aaron, and at 28, I fancied myself an adventurer of sorts. I wasn't a survivalist or anything, but I knew my way around a trail map and could start a campfire without burning my eyebrows off. Hiking was my therapy, my escape from the cubicle walls that seemed to close in tighter every day. I was the type who preferred solitude to crowds, the quiet of the mountains to the hum of the city. When I planned that trip to the Thornwood Range, I didn't think twice. It was supposed to be just another peaceful weekend in the wilderness. But what I didn't know was that the person I was before that trip, before everything, would never come back. I remember that trip like it was yesterday, not because it was beautiful, but because it destroyed a part of me I can't get back. I don't hike anymore, not since that weekend in 1993, and I certainly don't trust people like I used to. It was one of those ideas that seemed harmless at first, even exciting, a quick escape into the wild to clear my mind. But sometimes, when you step into the unknown doesn't let you leave the same. The plan was simple: 3 days in the Thornwood Range on a little-used trail called Devil's Crest Path. It was the kind of place only experienced hikers sought out, remote, challenging, and beautifully unspoiled. I craved the solitude, and this trail promised it in abundance. I threw my gear together, just the basics: a sleeping bag, a flashlight, canned food, and water. By the time I hit the road, I felt like I was already shaking off the monotony of my everyday life. The drive was uneventful at first. Long, winding dirt roads snaked through towering pines that seemed to swallow the sky, their dark needles blocking out even the afternoon sun. The deeper I went, the more disconnected I felt from civilization. My cell phone signal had long since died, leaving me alone with the hum of my Jeep and the occasional snap of twigs as animals darted through the underbrush. By the time I reached the trailhead, it was just me and the trees. I set off with excitement bubbling in my chest, my boots crunching against the carpet of leaves. The air was sharp and cold, the kind that bites your lungs and makes you feel alive. For hours, I hiked in a steady rhythm, letting my mind wander. I hadn't seen another soul since I left the car, and that was exactly what I wanted. But then I found the car. It was tucked into the trees just off the trail, its rusted frame partially hidden by vines and moss. It was an old model, something from the 60s or 70s, with peeling paint and shattered windows. There were no roads anywhere nearby, no conceivable reason for a car to be here, let alone one that looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The sight made my stomach churn, but I told myself people do strange things. Maybe someone dumped it here years ago. Maybe it was just a curiosity. I moved on. As the sun dipped low, the woods became eerily still. Not just quiet, empty. No birds, no rustling leaves, not even the hum of insects. It was as if the forest itself had gone silent to watch me. I tried to ignore it as I set up camp by a small creek, pitching my tent and eating a quick dinner. The cold seeped in quickly, wrapping itself around me as the last light of day vanished. I crawled into my sleeping bag, closed my eyes, and willed myself to sleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but the dark had grown absolute, pressing against the thin fabric of my tent. At first, I thought it was just the cold, or maybe a bad dream, but then I heard it, whispering. No, not whispering, murmuring, rhythmic and deliberate. It didn't sound like the wind or the water. It sounded human, though I couldn't make out the words. I lay frozen, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. The sound wasn't far off, but it didn't come closer. After what felt like hours, it stopped. The forest returned to its unnatural silence, but I didn't sleep again that night. By dawn, I was desperate to keep moving. The sooner I reached the ridge, the sooner I could start my trek back to the trailhead and leave this unsettling place behind. I packed up quickly and started walking, but an unnerving sensation crawled over me as I moved. The woods felt unnatural, as if they were alive and observing me. The trees seemed to lean inward, their twisted branches clawing toward the path like skeletal hands. Even the light filtering through the canopy felt wrong, dim and washed out, as though the sun itself struggled to penetrate the oppressive atmosphere. Around midday, I stumbled across the cabin. It looked like it had been dropped there by mistake, its roof sagging and walls rotting with age. Vines crept up its sides, wrapping the structure in a stranglehold. There was no path leading to it, no sign that anyone had been there in years. My curiosity got the better of me, and I stepped inside. The smell hit me first, a rancid, metallic stench that made me gag. The interior was dark, the windows caked with grime, but enough light filtered through to reveal the mess inside. Bones littered the floor, animal bones mostly, but something about them didn't sit right. Then I saw it. In the corner, half buried under debris, was a human skull. The sight of it rooted me to the spot, my breath caught in my throat. But that wasn't the worst part. The walls were covered in carvings, jagged angular symbols that didn't belong to any language I'd ever seen. They pulsed with a strange energy, almost like the wood itself was alive. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine as I backed out of the cabin. Whatever had happened here, I didn't want to know. I decided then and there to head back. My plan to reach the ridge no longer mattered. I just wanted to get out of those woods. But the further I walked, the heavier the air felt. The murmuring started again, faint at first, but growing louder with every step. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding me. Then came the footsteps. Not mine, something else. Slow, steady, deliberate. I turned, but there was nothing. No one. Yet the footsteps continued. I started to run. My breath came in gasps, my heart hammering in my chest as I crashed through the underbrush. The footsteps followed, never speeding up, always at the same measured pace. It was as if whatever was behind me knew I couldn't escape. When I burst into the clearing where my Jeep was parked, the relief was almost overwhelming. I jumped in, started the engine, and peeled out, the tires kicking up dirt and gravel. I didn't stop until I was miles down the road, the trees thinning out and the sunlight returning. Only then did I glance in the rearview mirror. He was there. A man stood at the edge of the forest, tall and impossibly thin, his clothes hanging in tatters. His face was gaunt, his skin pale and stretched too tightly over his skull. But it was his eyes that paralyzed me. They weren't eyes at all, just black, hollow voids that seemed to swallow the light around them. And his smile. It wasn't human. It was a cruel, jagged thing, more like a wound than an expression. I kept driving, my hands trembling on the wheel, and didn't stop until I reached the first town I came across. I never told anyone what I saw. Who would believe me? But a few weeks later, I saw a news report. A hiker had gone missing in the Thornwood Range. They found his camp, but not him. Whatever I saw that weekend wasn't human, and it's still out there, waiting, watching, calling. Sometimes late at night, I still hear the murmuring. It's faint, like a memory, but it's enough to remind me of the truth. There are things in the woods older than we can imagine, and some doors, once opened, can never be closed. The experience changed me in ways I'm still struggling to understand. I became cautious, paranoid even, noticing the subtle shifts in people's expressions, the hidden meanings in their words. I threw myself into work, trying to bury the memory, but it lingered, a shadow I couldn't escape. At night, I'd stare out the window, unable to shake the feeling he was still out there, watching. I started researching the Thornwood Range, uncovering decades of disappearances and sightings. People talked of whispers in the woods, of figures moving just out of sight. The patterns terrified me. The disappearances always clustered around ancient ritual dates. I became obsessed, piecing together connections that no one else seemed to notice. The more I learned, the more the nightmares came, those eyes, empty and watching, always in the dark. Years later, I read about a fire in the range uncovering ruins, marked with the same symbols I'd seen in that cabin. Archaeologists were baffled, but before I could learn more, the site was sealed off. The news vanished, and the people I contacted went silent. Whatever I had stumbled on was bigger than I'd imagined, and still out there. I don't hike anymore. I warn others to avoid the woods, to trust their instincts. Because sometimes the legends are true, sometimes the monsters are real, and sometimes they're just beyond the tree line, waiting.